So without further ado, I would like to introduce Camille Lloyd, the moderator of this event. Camille is the director of the Gallup Center on Black Voices. Camille leads Gallup's research initiative devoted to studying and highlighting the experiences of more than 40 million Black Americans. The center tracks and reports the progress on life outcomes regarding topics such as justice, health and well-being, economic opportunity, jobs and work, education and community, and environment. Before joining Gallup, Camille worked as a research professor at George Mason University. He has co-authored several book chapters and articles on best practices in juvenile justice education. Welcome, Camille.
Thank you for having me, Sarah. Welcome, everyone. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us today. It's for such an important discussion on data in the Black community. I am excited about our amazing panel who will go through and have conversations with each of them, but I'd like to just start with some quick introduction. We have Dr. Carrie Funk, who is the Director for Science and Society Research at Pew Research Center. Welcome, Dr. Funk. And we also have Dr. Carla Slocum, who's the Director of the Institute of African American Research at UNC Chapel Hill. And last but not least, we have Miss Candace Hokett, who is the lead consultant and founder of CHH Consulting. This panel is a dynamic panel in terms of the range of expertise that we have. And we are looking forward to just diving into our discussion around representation, mistrust, ways to amplify Black and other minority voices. And particularly, we know we have a wide range of you all in the audience, whether you're researchers, practitioners, or potential respondents yourself, that we hope that you will walk away from today's conversation and discussion with a new idea, maybe a nuanced perspective, or a new strategy in how you think about approaching research in the Black community and how you leverage data, how you address some of the issues and the challenges. And with that, I would like to kick off our discussion really with you, Dr. Funk, just maybe starting out with a little bit more introductions and telling us a short description of your organization and the work that you're currently doing related to data in the Black community.
Terrific. Happy to do that. So I'm a social scientist by training. I'm a longtime public opinion researcher, longtime member of DC AAPOR, and I've done a lot of. I have had a longstanding interest and done a lot of work over the years related to race, related to Black Americans, as well as other groups. But I want to talk today about my perspective now as director of research, looking at the implications of science for society. And I think just kind of use some of the examples we're seeing to help illustrate some of the challenges that we face trying to do this kind of work. So I think someone's going to help me throw up a few slides, but just going to show you a couple of examples that are driving our interest in doing more work related to Black Americans' perspectives on science and society. And obviously, I'm especially happy to be part of this panel because really I'm looking to connect with other researchers who share an interest in these questions. So I hope this venue will also prompt new connections among all of us after we sign off today. And again, thank you, DCAPOR and Camille, for pulling this together. This first data slide is just showing us the Pew Research Center surveys around people's intention to get a coronavirus vaccine. And the bottom line, the light blue line is showing us Black Americans. And the striking finding there is that Black Americans really stand out for a lower level of intention to get the coronavirus vaccine. In fact, they're the only group as of November that where you had a majority saying that they either definitely or probably would not get a coronavirus vaccine. This single finding, I think, in the middle of a pandemic, from our surveys as well as many others, it has done more to drive a conversation around race and the medical care system than I've seen for more than a decade. And I think it's a reminder to us how important data can be to the public discourse. As any group knows that's had trouble getting voice, that data can just help you be seen, help you start to be heard, help to start get things moving. And I think in terms of this data, we've actually seen a wealth of new research going on behind the scenes to try to unpack and explore what those experiences are, where those differences are coming from, and then eventually, of course, what could be done about it. So I think a lot of that is in the works simply because of this kind of data finding. I think that the concern might be that it took a pandemic to get that conversation going. And so that's just one of the challenges we have, that we can't wait for a pandemic on every important question. If we turn to the next slide, one of the things that we were struck by in terms of that difference on vaccines is it didn't seem to be new. And I'll walk you through this if something happens with the slides. This wasn't really a new issue as far as we could tell. It's of course a new vaccine and a new disease. But one of the long-standing issues has to do with people's trust in scientists to act in the best interest of the public. And that's been around since we've been measuring. That's been around in other public polls since they've been measuring. This is a long-standing issue, and it's actually a very important question to the scientific community. They're asking all the time, how much does the public trust scientists? And in this case, I would focus on these darker blue bars that's showing what we call the strong level of trust, people who have a great deal of confidence in scientists to act in the best interest of the public. And what you're seeing there in the middle section is that on average, Black Americans tended to have a lower level of trust in scientists, particularly than whites, but and sometimes it bounces around a little bit. Most recently, since the pandemic started, we kind of saw an uptick there, but it's been lower for a while, and we don't know a lot about it. One of the things that we have been talking quite a bit about lower levels of trust in groups and institutions across society, but we haven't heard quite as much discourse around lower levels of trust among Black Americans and what that might mean, where it might come from, what could be done about it. And then I have one more slide just to show you kind of a smattering of other kinds of things that are driving our interest related to science. And I'll just, again, walk you through them. Each row here is a different question, a different finding, just to illustrate. The first one talks about people's judgments around the effect of science on society. And what you see there is that Black Americans tend to be less positive. If you got to see the rest of the question, you'd know that they tend to be more ambivalent about the effect of science on society, more likely to say that it's been a mixed impact overall compared with, in particular, compared with whites. In the second row, you also see that on average, Black Americans tend to see more problems, more research misconduct by scientists. And in this case, we picked out medical research scientists, but actually we asked about 6 different groups of scientists and professionals, and we saw the same pattern across all of them. So some concerns there around kind of scientific misconduct and in other questions, accountability. And then on the bottom, to illustrate that we also tend to see lower levels of engagement with science among Black Americans compared with white Americans in particular. And in this case, less likely to say they have an interest in science news, but we also can see that in other kinds of ways. Now, and that's it for the slides. I want to just use those data points to help us kind of ground this conversation. Our focus is on public opinion research from that broad lens of what's happening in the general population. And that means you're often thinking about Black Americans compared with other groups in society. And that's a particular way to think about it. And I feel certain we'll talk about other approaches that can also be beneficial. I want to just, even if you're just coming from this lens, just talk about some of the challenges that we see. And I'm going to kind of call attention to 2 kinds of challenges. One are data limitations and what that means for what we say about Black Americans and what we think about what Black Americans see and think. And the other really has to do with the focus and commitment to be looking at research that's relevant to Black Americans. So in terms of data, we are much better off than we were years ago. Those of us who've been in the business know that we were often doing random digit dial telephone surveys. We had roughly 1,500 respondents. If you're looking to reach a group that's maybe 10, 11, 12% of the population, we were very happy with 100 to 150 Black Americans in each survey. But there's not a whole lot you could say at the end of that about Black American opinion. The challenge now is that even for all the resources that the Pew Research Center brings to bear on public opinion research, and I admit we are extremely fortunate, we're still hampered by sample size issues. Mm-hmm. And we have larger margins of error around public opinion among Black Americans. And I think that shows in our reports all the time. So all the findings that I showed you today, I am very confident that they're findings because I've been seeing them in different guises for the past several years. But every time we get one of these findings, we look at it and we spend a lot of time wondering if it's a reliable difference. And that means that, years pass, right, before I can call attention to it because I'm not even sure if it's real. And then if it's real, obviously you want to know more about where does it come from? What does it mean? How does it connect with other kinds of things? So if you're spending all that time because of your limited sample size, just finding out whether there are differences or similarities, you can't get to those next questions. There's a second part of that limitation of sample sizes, and I'll get into the specifics. And the other is, and that second part is that you often want to go beyond Black Americans as a group, and you want to talk about heterogeneity among Black Americans. So again, if you don't have enough in your sample, you're never going to get to those questions. So even now, we are often dealing with much larger surveys. We have a representative panel that we've built, the American Trends Panel. We often are doing surveys with as many as 12,000 respondents. We're extremely fortunate. It's fantastic. We often have samples of Black Americans, 700 to 1,000. But there's a technical thing that many people here will know about. A design effect means that your effective sample size can easily be about half that many. So if you're looking to understand generational differences or education or income differences, religious differences, there's so much you can't get to, right? Because you really can't get to the fault lines of public opinion among Black Americans, the ways in which people are similar and different. So those are, I think, some of the data challenges, even from this perspective. The other point I wanted to make has to do with focus and commitment. There is something to be said about making an explicit effort to see Black Americans' perspectives, and I think that can help us drive measurement solutions. The Pew Research Center has made a commitment to doing more to help us do a better job, I think, understanding Black Americans' perspectives and experiences. So we've reorganized our research staff as well to bring a new focus on all of our work related to race and ethnicity. And I think that will make a difference over time. And in our science research, as you're seeing, we've made a commitment to designing new research that can help us unpack the kinds of data clues that I've been showing you today. So I think that also will pay off over time. But it has been, it has been a process that perhaps took a lot of time. So that's one of the challenges I think we can also put on the table. With that, I do want to make sure we turn over to others, and I hope that we can have a robust discussion.
So Dr. Funk, before we go to others, I have one pressing question here. When you think about some of the research methodologies that we can adapt to address some of those challenges and the gaps that exist within representation, what are you finding in your work that is helping, or, what are some solutions we can start to think about in terms of filling in those gaps in representation across the board?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two things that I'd say we're doing. One is we are doing more mixed methods research than probably we ever did before. And I suspect that part of that value is, obviously the qualitative is just rich and wonderful anyways, But I think part of that value has to do with being able to just focus on the group and not have that comparative lens. We were talking about how there's some pluses and minuses to saying, what's the US public as a whole look like, and being able to focus in. So I think that qualitative work allows you to just listen to one group. And then the second thing I think we're doing is basically a principle of all of this is like, okay, we don't have enough data or the right data, but we do have some data. So, pulling together what I've shown you today and much more like it, being able to say, what do we know, and try to take it as far as we can is a contribution, and it can start the ball rolling. Knowing, and then part of what we're doing with that is then saying, what do we know that can help us design better questionnaires that could perhaps unpack more of it, right? To always go to that next layer. If you're not paying any attention to the differences, you're never going to design questions that could possibly uncover what's going on, right? So you do kind of need all those stages from my perspective. So that's hopefully a short answer.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. All right. I just want to now introduce, reintroduced again, Dr. Slocum, Director of the Institute of African American Research. Dr. Slocum, if you don't mind just giving us a short description of your work and what your organization is doing related to data and the Black community. I think you're on mute, Dr. Slocum.
Sorry.
There we go.
Yes, I am really glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I, as you said, direct the Institute of African American Research, which is based at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And as an institute, we're 25 years old, and our mission is to facilitate and disseminate research about people of African descent. So it's quite a broad mission. But as an institute based at a university, we provide faculty and students with resources to allow them to develop and enhance their research activity and skills, as well as share their research results. Some of the resources that we provide for them to be able to achieve this is funding, of course, but also we provide them access to research training and a research community and grant development services. So these are the kinds of things that we provide for people at the university. I am a cultural anthropologist by training, and I do qualitative research. I do ethnographic research within historic Black communities, both in the United States and in the Caribbean. That's been sort of the trajectory of my career. Shall I jump into the other questions that you were asking around mistrust, or did you want to save those for later?
I think we can jump right in to the
Sure.
mistrust question. The research that you've done, and as an anthropologist, we do know that we've heard some of the challenges with conducting research with the Black community, or depending on what lens and perspective you bring to, as a researcher, that there can be quite a bit of a mistrust of research efforts and surveys and studies among the Black community. In a little bit of your work, tell us why you think that this higher level of mistrust might exist within the Black community.
Okay, so I found the chart interesting that Dr. Funk showed regarding the different levels. And a key question that I would bring to those kinds of results in that chart would be, what's behind that? And to think about it less as a cultural kind of question or an attitude sort of question, but what has led people to have distrust? What has been going on? Where have we as researchers failed to gain trust over time? And, a common way that people have addressed this, especially as all the questions have come up in this, and while we're living in this pandemic, has been to think about history. A common way to think about this is about the history. Lots of people reference the Tuskegee study and other sorts of things historically. And I think that's one way to address it, that there's been this history of research that has not benefited the Black community, if not outright harmed and actually threatened people's lives. So we know that's a truth. At the same time, this all isn't strictly in the past, and that's part of the problem as well. So there are ways that Black communities continue to be treated as objects of research, harmed by research, excluded from the benefits of research, excluded from participation in actually the design of the research. And then, of course, as you mentioned, misrepresented. You talked about representation, misrepresented in research. There are some recent cases of this. We're probably replete with them, but there are recent cases I can think of in social science, for example, where Black communities have been represented in a kind of sensationalist kind of way, and that pulls on all these sorts of stereotypes we have about Black communities as imbued with criminality, as places that are violent, as places that are deeply impoverished, and all these sort of negative imageries that contribute to that.
Mhm.
And so I think that's part of it, is how are we representing Black communities when we actually write up and present the results of our research. People are aware of our research. There's a book out there called When They Read What We Write. People are aware of the kind of work that we're doing, and when they see how we choose to talk about them and represent them, there is mistrust. And really, it makes perfect sense, in my opinion, that would be the case. I think one way that we can address this mistrust is, again, I come at this question as an anthropologist, a cultural anthropologist, and the hallmark of cultural anthropology is ethnography. And what is ethnographic research? It is actually deep time getting to know the communities where you're doing the research and building up relationships. I would really underscore relationship building. We recognize that relationships are key for not only being able to get access to the communities and being able to get access to data, but also to do research that shows respect for the people that we're studying. When you're building up those meaningful relationships, you're also demonstrating an interest in respect and value of those communities. The hallmark of Black Lives Matter movement now is all about demonstrating and actually trying to gain recognition for Black communities' value and worth. And we need to do that sort of thing in our research as well. So think about what are the quality of the relationships that we have. Think about things like transparency, sharing research, sharing the research results, sharing our purpose, sharing our goals, being honest about where there have been failings in our fields in the past and how we're working actively to try to guard against those sorts of things. And just being honest with people about what we're all about and what we have been our shortcomings in the past. So I think acknowledging that. The other thing that I'll mention is respect for people's lived experience as knowledge.
Mhm.
We tend to come at research, we have our degrees and we have all of our expert training. And so we come in as sort of the experts. We've designed the study. We know what we need to know. We want to actually talk to you, interview you, survey you, and get all that information.
Mhm.
Well, lived experience is expert knowledge too. People have lived years of their lives. They know what their community is about. They know what their experience has been. That is expert information. And it shouldn't just be used as something that we can extract. There's something that we just want to take as data, as information, but it's something that we think about to help inform how we go about designing our research, what kinds of questions we're going to ask, what kinds of things are important. So coming at this sort of with, the kinds of questions that we're asking, the things we want to know by being informed by what people already know about their experiences.
Mhm.
That's a real hard one, I think, for us who are trained to think that we are experts. We've had all these years of getting these degrees and things like that. And so it's hard sometimes, I think, for people to step back and actually sort of acknowledge and give over the idea that there's expert information and skill sets here that can contribute to the design of these studies. I think that's important. And I have lots of examples. I don't want to take up too much time. I have lots of examples of how people have actually designed their studies with that kind of inclusion and respect. I think that matters.
I would love if you can share that with us on the researchers. When you think about what are effective ways for engaging the Black community, you mentioned, of course, approaching people's experiences as knowledge itself. But what are other ways that, as researchers, we should be looking to change up our strategy for engaging the Black community? What does that look like? What does a best practice look like?
Participation of people, inclusion of people from the communities in all aspects of research, from conceptualization to dissemination. And again, so for example, a lot of people who do qualitative research will think about ways of including people in different parts of the research. But often in the conceptualization and design of the research, that's where people are less likely to be included. Communities that are considered to be understudied, to be part of, to be sort of the object of the study, are not included in that even design process. And so what if we were to include people actually before we even finalize what this study is actually going to look like? So we might know that there are health disparities. Well, as we start to think about how we're going to research that for a particular community, what if we actually went to the community to try to figure out how to include them in that part of the design? And so I can actually give you an example. We're coming up on the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre, the event in 1921 that decimated a Black community in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And so right now, as that community is trying to do sort of to reckon with and actually do research about what happened and really get underneath what happened, one of the things they're doing is trying to research the mass graves, the possibility that there were, actually I think it's now known that there were these mass graves that existed where people who were murdered during the massacre were buried. And so this is a research that's now being done by archaeologists and physical anthropologists who are having to do these very kinds of technical types of research activities to figure out where might these mass graves be. And in Tulsa, they have started training people in the Black community. And many people, actually, there's sort of been a history of activism for decades in this community around the fact that, yes, this history happened to us and nobody's paying attention to it. And we actually believe there's certain sorts of things that resulted from it that nobody's paying attention to. So now, after all those years of activism, people have gotten a place in the research process and they've become trained to do the research with this technical equipment. Actually, it's beyond my own expertise, so I don't know all the details about it. But what I do know as an anthropologist is that they have been included in the full process. So you'll see them outside at these fields where they believe these burials happened, these mass graves existed, and they're excavating on the fields and they're using the equipment that's necessary for that. So that's a way to include people. You're giving them the skill to actually be able to do the research themselves alongside people who have the expertise and the training to know how to use those materials and equipment already. And people then get buy-in to the process and they see that their participation actually matters. So that is one example. Another example I have is we run something at the Institute of African American Research called the Black Communities Conference. I'll have to mention that a little bit later. And in this conference, we try to connect Black communities, leaders of Black communities, artists and activists from Black communities with academic researchers who might, we hope, partner and collaborate on these different activities, research activities in the communities. Well, at our conference, one presentation stands out for me where somebody talked about the fact that she was an activist looking at health crises in her particular community. And there was somebody from a university who wanted to research this health crisis and came in and worked with the activists to train them to be able to do the data collection. And they got actually data analysis. So actually after they actually collected the data, then the activists stayed involved at the point of analysis and dissemination. So the researcher would take the activists to conferences with them to actually do their own presentations. They got their names on publications. So that's another place where somebody felt like, I learned these skills and I have my name on something and I have ownership of this too. And the person who presented this really felt like this was meaningful and valuable, and they felt fully participating in this research. So these are just a couple of examples of how we can include people more in research.
Thank you. All right. Candace Hokett, just want to turn to you in terms of just telling us a little bit about how you've engaged with research in your work. It's kind of both from both lens, so both a person who conducts research with different groups, but also a user of research on different race and ethnicities and communities in terms of your advising and strategy that you provide to your clients. So Candace, tell us a little bit more about yourself and the work that you do and how you're leveraging data on the Black community with your clients and in your research.
Sure thing. So I'll start by saying I got my marketing degree at Howard University, and it was always really important for me, even before graduation, to make sure that within media and messaging, Black communities were portrayed the right way. We were telling our stories and being highlighted and celebrated in ways that really mattered. And I've been able to be blessed enough to do that in a lot of my roles. So I've been working in research for about 10 years. And I would say that multicultural market research comes heavily on the one employee that might be on these primary research teams doing these custom studies internally for brands, who then gets tasked with a lot of these roles. And I will say that that's a blessing, but putting the onus on a non-white employee to be the voice and the sole determining factor for a lot of these studies in the design process is stressful. And I think what Dr. Slocum really just said about integrating a lot of these templates, a lot of the trainings and things that you can bring forth in the data collection phase is really important, because it helps integrate people from an inclusive standpoint at work. So I've been able to work for a bunch of different companies where I've been able to do this. So in the retail space, I've worked for Macy's, and I've transitioned now towards media where I really wanted to be. And that started in TV for Black Entertainment Television, a BET Viacom network. And then most recently, Refinery 29, a Vice company, which is always speaking for all women, but specifically putting a halo over subgroups and ethnicity groups and identity groups at large for inclusivity. What I'll say now I'm doing is I'm working as an independent contractor. I love this space so much. So I don't want to really do much else unless it really comes from this intent. And of course, I've touched a bunch of studies from quant to qual, but I'll say I'm a qual baby myself. And I definitely do value the color and the storytelling that comes from this aspect of interviewing and ethnographies. So I'll say that my range spans, but what I've been able to do now as an independent contractor is work with really great companies and agencies for our clients who want to do work like this, because everybody's talking about it and everybody now feels the need to really start walking the walk, and that's totally fine. So where can you go? There's a lot of companies probably even watching now that are great partners, but even the company that I'm working with, Research Narrative, outside of CHH Consulting, we do a lot of media research. And I'll say that for starters, one thing that we're doing is we are putting a lot of onus on our sample partners. Carrie mentioned this from the Pew side, and knowing that there is a larger margin of error when you're taking things and really trying to net them back to a nationally representative sample. And let's just say that's 1,000 representatives if you're just taking 13%, that's not a ton of people. And how can we make sure that the elements and the diversity, even within these ethnicity groups, are still being represented? It's really important. So what we've been doing with these sample partners is working with recruiting and getting them to be more inviting to the Black community, like these two really just mentioned, which is involving at the recruitment stage more than just display ads, which I know is so hard right now because it's coronavirus and we're all in a pandemic and we're all really being talked to virtually. However, the community, and to find these virtual community groups, whether they are church groups, community center groups, alumni groups, HBCU, groups, small Black owned business entrepreneurial groups, there's so many. And it's easier said than done to try to get these sampling partners to do that. But hopefully with all of the demand, there will be more advances and we can just kind of hope that these conversations lead to it. The second thing that we're doing is working with clients because they're asking for this. And then that is a trickle down effect. These sampling providers, they want our business and we want business with businesses who want to be better. So we all need to do better. And I think that that leads to my second point as to how us at Research Narrative, and just me in general as an independent contractor, making sure that brands want to talk to underrepresented groups, that being the Black community, and taking the focus and making that cohort even bigger. In short, oversampling takes the opportunity to see that all Black people are not created equal. And there's so many unique differences that we don't just like one thing. And one client of ours is in the TV space that wanted to research Black men. And what we learned was that there was so much hesitancy from their team to consider changing, which might actually then alienate their core customer. And we had to prove just through the insights, through the results, that that's not the case. And a lot of things, preferably, are comparable between Gen Pop and the Black community. And this was Black men specifically. We did quant and qual, but I'll just say what we saw was that 2 out of 3 Black men surveyed said that shows depict Black Americans with way too many stereotypes, especially in unscripted reality TV programming. And Dr. Slocum really just mentioned that, and showing that we want to see our stories being told positively, and knowing that we have to make sure that the data reflects men and or women, depending on the target, who are really saying that. And then thirdly, since this summer working with Research Narrative, it's been really great. I've been doing great work for myself in different beauty brands in the retail space, but this company has helped us make so many strides in media and marketing messaging. So what we've been doing is we've been organizing as a group this summer with other independent market researchers, media and education professionals, and even board members who are educators at different colleges and universities. We're bringing ourselves together. We are officially the Multicultural Insights Collective, and we're launching a study called the Voices of Equity Panel Presents Words Matter. Words Matter is really just honing in on discussing diversity and that journey to bring better equity and inclusion from the inside out. And honestly, we're saying it, but who's really taking the data and insights and telling these teams collectively, from the DEI department to the marketing department to the social media team representing online, and then also the insights team together, and trying to get these companies to see positive change? I think it's really a slow process, and we know that, but we've had some huge brands get involved with us. So I'll just plug it now for anybody interested in seeing what we're doing and maybe even wanting to support on our consortia study that really is honing in on the words that really matter and potentially might inspire action, or that could be either positive or negative, and what we want to do to basically inform on awareness of that. You can go to voicesofequity.com and just see what we're doing, and we're sharing our report out, and we'd love to share it with you. So that's 3 things we're doing now.
So Candace, you said something that I want to hone in and probe a little bit on, where you mentioned, you know, in the research field, being the only researcher of color and all the onus being on you to somehow have all the perspectives to bring in, and all of a sudden, yep, this is going to be representative because we got Candace's input. How can we increase racial diversity in public opinion research and in market research in general, so that you're not relying on a solitary individual to be the only perspective that you would ever infuse in your research, right? So I want to talk a little bit more about what your experience have been there, and you know, what are some ways that we can increase racial diversity in the field among ourselves as researchers and practitioners.
So whether it's a Black researcher, someone who speaks Mandarin, someone who has a physical and or mental disability and still comes to work and shows up every day. There's so many versions of diversity that can really play a role into coming to a research study with empathy and with purpose. And I think depending on your intent and the questions that you're asking early on, depending on that, it doesn't matter who you are as a team member. So I would say, yeah, providing that level of inclusivity, but how does that really look? Honestly, people say that all the time. And I'd say the Multicultural Insights Collective is really honing in on what can we do to prove it. And here's an example. I have a ton of awesome ideas, and there might be a huge group on a Zoom meeting. And technologically, I might not be one who's very vocal. And that might be the case for other Black employees at work, depending on what department they work in. And we need leaders in the room to want to hear what we have to say. And for us to also participate, but bring forth things at the right time. And let's just say that that employee might not be very vocal to share their thoughts. And whether they're tasked with being that main voice or not, that can be taxing. So let's just say this big meeting, what needs to be said isn't being said. Make sure that you as a team member, you as a leader of that team, are putting that hat on to look at things with a multicultural focus and lens of curiosity from day one. And those conversations will never not be had. That's really important to me, in my opinion. And I will say also, just knowing that employing other Black researchers is a necessity. So not making it something that is honed in on just that one person, making sure that that one person has a pipeline of other potential, you know, colleagues that they can help bring out more work opportunities to. And even if that state stands on outsourcing to contractors and vendors. Take, for instance, I know possibly in the virtual room right now is like Ebony Systems. They are a recruiting agency that speaks to Mandarin focus groups, Latinx based qual studies, Black market researchers, and finding sample for each and every one of them. There aren't the traditional legacy partners that you always have to partner with in terms of finding sample. There are really niche, hyper-focused teams out there and people who know those teams who can really help you get down to that core audience that you're looking to target in your research studies. And I think that that's two things that can be done. But at the end of the day, it starts with the fear, letting go of the fact that no, you're not alienating your core audience when you make a priority to uplift the Black community.
Thank you so much. So I know I want to let our audience know that please feel free to use the Q&A chat to share any questions as we open up the panel now. I know we have a couple of questions that came in. Dr. Funk, this one was particularly a question related to understanding attitudinal differences among Black adults from a socioeconomic standpoint, and you know, what do we see in terms of the research you shared on trust and a willingness to take the vaccine? Did we see any differences by socioeconomic group or age among Black respondents for that study?
Can I mention that we don't have full ability to unpack all of it, but we have looked at some of it. I think the age is what strikes me the most among Black Americans. We do see what is a parallel difference with older Black adults saying that they're more likely to take the vaccine than younger. We see that among the population as well, with the idea that people who are older see more of a need for it. So that was kind of reassuring. Overall, we see across racial and ethnic groups, we see lower family incomes that have been adjusted for family size and cost of living tend to be less inclined to get a vaccine. So that's the big pattern. And we tend to be limited to break that out by group beyond that.
Mhm. Dr. Funk, the follow up I had to that question is, for something that is as serious as taking a vaccine in the middle of a pandemic, what can you do now, or what can we do now? Just thinking about your background in terms of public trust and engagement, um, to overcome some of that hurdle? Is it sharing the results of our studies that say, acknowledging that mistrust and acknowledge that a lack of confidence in science? What do we do in terms of starting to make change, or to move towards addressing some of those issues, so people aren't as skeptical when they see these results? Right, there's an underlying mistrust of statistics in general. What can we start to do now? Because I feel like, especially on the pandemic data, that we're in this critical moment where um, trusting or not trusting can mean life or death.
Um, yeah, excellent point, if sobering. So I'm seeing lots of studies around the country, often on a community level, as Carla was saying, building kind of building relationships with community leaders and doing things to usually qualitative, but often both, a little bit of both in terms of qualitative and quantitative, to build relationships with people to understand better where they're coming from. In terms of the data that we see at this kind of high level, to me, the value of this kind of data is that it shows you these big patterns, right? So you obviously are going to miss a lot of the nuances because none of us as individuals looks like the average American. But you're trying to see the big patterns and not be distracted by some of those smaller things that are true about each individual. So to me, the pattern there is that, number one, we've also tended to see Black Americans look different when it comes to their beliefs about other vaccines. So the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine. So we also see government data telling us that Black, I'm not sure about adult or children in general, but Black adults have lower immunization rates. So we know there's something else going on beyond the coronavirus vaccine. So that tells us that this connects to a broader set of issues. So that's a way in which you can use the data with its limitations to at least point you into some directions.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, the bigger question about trust is everything that we kind of have said. It's like, how do you rebuild trust? Well, this is a big problem, but you do need to acknowledge what the sources of experience were that might drive lower levels of trust, and how are you going to do it differently? And that's an ongoing conversation. I think you don't do it just once.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Slocum, I'd like to pivot to you on that one, because there's some of those deep historical uh, uh, reasons why. And I think that we know some of that is not new. Like, I remember growing up learning about the Tuskegee study. Um, how do we take those experiences and learnings beforehand when we approach something like um, a pandemic? And we know that vaccination is going to come, is going to be something that will come out of research and work, but we know that that's already going to be a hurdle for our Black community. What are things that we can start to think about, knowing our history and past experiences, to help mitigate some of the potential barriers that will exist for current efforts? I think you're on mute.
Okay, sorry about that again.
There we go.
I would return to the point also about acknowledging that history and just acknowledging that past so that we're candid about what has happened. I mean, I think people want honesty, people want transparency. And I think in order to get, um, a sense for people to have a sense that they're actually, somebody's not trying to put a silver lining on something or just sort of gloss over something. I think you have to be honest about what has happened in the past and all the efforts that you're doing to make sure that sort of thing doesn't happen again. I do think the things that have already been brought up are relevant here, and that would include who is at the table when these sorts of decisions are being made. So for example, if there's a public campaign, I feel as if we have heard repeatedly information about the low percentage of African Americans who are trusting of the vaccine. I think I was hearing recently that that's changing a little bit, but we've been hearing that a lot. Well, what if we heard less about the fact that there's mistrust among African Americans about this, but more about the reasons why, more about what has been happening to lead to these kinds of perceptions, and then what people are doing actively to change the problems that have existed in the past, not just the goal is to build up trust, but the goal is also, for example, with the vaccine, to get people to be trusting of the vaccine.
Mhm.
And therefore, I think what needs to happen is a sense of just being honest with people. I return to that point about honesty, but also getting other people involved, getting more African Americans involved in this particular case, in those campaigns that are being disseminated, and that Black people are centered in those kinds of campaigns rather than sort of seen as objects. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but I think you always want to have whose message, who you're trying to target a message to, who you're trying to assist, be included in the process as you try to figure out your strategies. And so I think we want to have representation in those strategies.
Okay. Candace, this we had a question around, overcoming the African American or Black stereotypes that's usually portrayed in media and entertainment. So how can we overcome some of these stereotypes? What does that look like? Is it infusing research into the decision points when companies or organizations are making decisions on what to display, what aspects of Black culture or Black Americans to include in a role or an imagery? What does that look like? I think it's no secret that market research has come under quite a bit, or the lack of proper market research and ads and branding over the last, in the social media era, and with cancel culture, that there's more attention being paid. But how can African Americans overcome some of these stereotypes that are portrayed?
So I'll start by saying that I think that the question may have also included how can African Americans overcome this? And when I initially first read it, I thought to myself, I don't believe wholeheartedly that it's an African American people issue. And I think we all agree to that, and that's why we're here. So I really appreciate this point, one mostly being because it takes the round table time period where there are the right people sitting at that table to make these choices and to speak up. And that's not always the case. So from a DEI perspective, companies really have to be looking to employ and diversify from all angles. And I think that that's super important. From a research standpoint, when it comes to the work that I do, I believe that work can be done, insights can be generated, and recommendations can be made, but it does not matter, and it will never matter if teams are not really ready to take steps that they feel like they can't trust. And in some areas of business, it might even be worth it to show and prove how testing new opportunities and new concepts to go into hyper-focused groups like the Black community are beneficial and not as alienating to the past and things that have been done historically with that brand, and understanding how to transition to that. So let's just say a brand has had TV shows for years and they've all been targeting a majority white consumer. And now there are a slew of new topics, concepts, or TV shows, pilots that can be tested and really brought forth. How can that be done at the beginning stages? How can that be done bravely to know that they shouldn't be superficial stories about things that we have heard before, things that we have seen before in media? Tell a new story. There are so many angles to the Black community and where we live and how we shine. And it's not always the traditional negative stereotype, drama filled storyline, or I'd say rags to riches or out of the gutter type of mentality. There are so many things that can come from a more positive light, and it takes people wanting to take that route, knowing that the numbers and the ratings won't decline significantly, and that other brands are doing it, especially on the premium side and on the streaming side, that you can clearly see are significantly succeeding. So there's no excuse for making content that is potato chips when we're really looking for substance and sustenance, the real meat and potatoes to the media.
And that range of that performance, Black culture is not just trauma. There's so much joy and creativity and kind of like opening up to that wide spectrum of what that Black experience is. We have a question, and I want to pose it to all three of you ladies. It's really about where Black voices are represented in conversation. So as researchers and users of data, where do you think that Black voices are represented in conversations and decision making around data, and where do you think that Black voices are missing? So I'll let you all who wants to go first. Oh, you're going to let me pick on. Okay. All right. Dr. Slocum, where do you think Black voices are now being represented in conversations and decision making, and really where you feel Black voices are missing?
So one challenge I think with this question is, I think there's variation. I think there is variation. I mean, we have to remember, first of all, that Black communities are not monolithic. I think we also have to realize that research studies are not monolithic. And so one thing I think is that we're going to see variation in where and how Black voices are represented and included well. So it's hard for me to think about a particular area where Black voices are and where Black voices aren't, because I really do think it sort of varies across areas. I'll be interested to see what the other panelists have to say, but I do find it hard to sort of pick one particular area. I think you're always going to find areas where Black voices and participation is missing and underrepresented. And I think there'll be other places where you'll have those examples that I gave before, where people are better represented than they have been in other kinds of places. But I guess one thing I will say, going back to a comment I made before, is that, I said before, I think you need to have the participation at all stages of the process. And I do think we don't tend to think about Black community participation, and probably other communities as well, but Black community participation in research at the design stage, at the analysis stage too, at the dissemination stage. I think the part we've been better at including people in, if we have done that, has been in, maybe getting people to be research assistants when we go out and we do surveys or we do interviews in the field or that sort of thing. You see studies that are designed more with that proportion, but I think it's more rare to see somebody who has organized a study where when they're sitting down to conceptualize what are the kinds of questions we need, where should this study actually go, who should be the target participants in this study, target respondents in this study. That's the part where we don't see people at the table. And then certainly, the dissemination I mentioned before, the example of somebody who actually included somebody as a collaborator all the way to the point of publication, somebody who's named as an author on a publication. That's rare. And I think we could see more of that because, as I mentioned before, I think it would benefit us to see more of that because, as I mentioned before, that's where people feel respected, valued, and included.
Okay. Dr. Funk?
Okay. Well, I mean, my mind was really focused on the workforce in terms of that. I do see that the more diversity, and as Candace says, at all kinds of levels, the better. And certainly the Pew Research Center has this whole collaborative culture around designing public opinion surveys. We feel that we need that. No single person should ever be writing a questionnaire because no single person can ever even try to phrase things in a way that relate to people. So the truth is, I think that that means that the more diversity you have at that table, right, the better in terms of the nature of the product that you're bringing together. And we don't have enough diversity in the workforce. So that's really where I've been focusing in terms of thinking about what do we do next? How do we do it? And there's a couple of things I'll put on the table. One thing I always thought was that social researchers often like doing work that they care about, that they think make a difference for society. And so the more work we do will also be kind of reinforcing in terms of showing people that this area of research does have something that speaks to you and you could do something you care about and also pursue these careers. And I don't know if you want to go with that, but
Nope.
okay. So
That
and
works.
then so that's one thing. And I guess my general thesis is I don't have control to do lots of things. I can't hire lots of people. There's lots of things I can't do, but there are also things that I can do. So to start with what we can do to broaden that conversation is what we should all be focused on as individuals. And then there's other things organizations can do.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Candace? What can we do? What do you think that you see that Black voices are represented more and where they're missing?
I mean, it always starts with who are these voices and how are they representing the entire culture, but we'll leave that aside. And I do believe that most often I see from a capitalistic mindset, always really seeing representation in spend data. And when it comes to TV viewership and ratings and talking about how much the Black community consumes. But when it comes to the trend forecast mentality and that whole space of being trendsetters, the Black community has and always will be at the forefront of setting all trends within specifically media and entertainment and a lot of things social media wise, even when it comes to just pop culture at large, music, etc. And I say that where we don't end up getting that representation, even though we're there, is the highlighting of our work, the recognition of our input, and the importance to make decisions off of our stories, and knowing that qualitatively we speak volumes just as much as our numbers do, and it says sometimes a totally different story. Spend data could say one thing, but when you really hear what the Black community might have to say, it might be completely different and way more colorful and important for change. And I think even when it comes to stuff we mentioned earlier regarding COVID and the reluctance to trust and really be interested in having a vaccination be something that may or may not, in your mind, change your life as a Black woman or man. I think here is really important to create enough communication that is visual, that tells stories, that has real people showing and communicating their experiences, whether positive, hesitant, and or negative. I think the span internally for research purposes is really important, but also communicating that on a marketing lens is really important too, to start to really get people comfortable about talking about it, get over certain things that might be difficult to say, and to admit whether a part of the Black community or not. And also just making sure to see that numbers are not lying, and then putting faces behind those numbers and names is really important as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. We have a question here related to just the challenges that exist in terms of sample size issues. The question really talks about the result of our limited sample size issues and tend to lead to overgeneralizing of our findings. So the question here is really about where are some of those opportunities for more disaggregated data to spotlight significant differences among the Black community. And I'll put my spin on it before I throw it out to you ladies, is that I feel like marketers and advertisers had figured this out, and we struggle with this from a social science perspective, which is how do we find opportunities for disaggregating data? What are those opportunities, and what can we do to spotlight significant differences among the Black community? Candace, you want to go first?
I do not. I want to.
Okay, all right, that's fine. Dr. Funk, I saw your mute button go off.
Okay.
I mean, there's a few things you can do. Obviously, you can push some of the analysis and disaggregate to its full extent. And we also often use regression analyses of one way or another to try to get more purchase, so you can talk a little bit more about patterns. But the thing that I think that you'll like the most is that you can also highlight some of those open-end comments or other kinds of qualitative measures. And what you pick out to highlight really can, it can play into a stereotype, or it can help show that diversity. And so you could be really thoughtful about what you're picking out of those. And I think that would help illustrate some of the differences.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to really talk on that same space, especially within qualitative, and how much depth there is to an answer, and also bringing the right leaders into the room at that point in time, outside of just discussion guide creation, having them really sit and watch these conversations happen, the inflections, the expressions on the faces, the hand gestures, it all matters. I had a client who we sat through 2 months of a quant and qual study in the beauty space to test products that had different shades aligning to those multicultural women. And in short, results showed that the product would not work. And it showed that this customer that they currently have not acquired actually really likes the brand and wants to find a way to relate and feel a part of it. And one comment specifically in qual, but not in quant, came up in each of the 4 groups we did about the fact that the social media page did not feel relatable, whether it was about who they saw or what they read, and the tone and the slang and the colloquialisms at large, and the fun that came, and the music choices that came along with branding and talking back to the consumer. Sometimes numbers will tell you, oh, what a clean social media page, if you ask that quant question. But then when getting people into a room, what we learned was that there was still room to meet the Black community where they weren't currently meeting the Black community on social and in marketing. And that's a clear example.
I can just, as I said before, I'm a cultural anthropologist, so I do very qualitative type of research, and we rely a lot of times on case examples, and not for marketing purposes, but nonetheless, we do rely on individual cases that are not necessarily representative, but that have something really meaningful to inform us about a particular individual experience or set of experiences that we can learn something from. And so we do tend to think that if you pull out something that is very rich and meaningful in terms of an individual or a set of individuals' experiences, they are worth profiling and highlighting because there's still something to learn from them, even if they are not representative or we can't generalize from them in the ways that I know a lot of scientific research relies on.
So this one is a deep question, and thoughts for some reflection. So this question is really about how, as researchers, um, about the importance of coming to grips with our own bias, and addressing systemic racism. So I want to kind of phrase that more in a question, and maybe more from your personal lens and your work is, how do you interrogate your own practices in terms of addressing any potential bias that might be seeping into the design of your research, the execution of your research, or your insights that you're providing?
I can say being a part of the Multicultural Insights Collective right now, this consortia team of a bunch of different people, ethnically, we are extremely diverse. And then there's also a ton of gender and just age diversity. In general, when we get together for a meeting, something that might seem like a really quick turnaround gets discussed and really thought through. And people agree, people disagree, people challenge statements, people really put all of us in the position to make sure we're putting an unbiased hat on when we're conducting. And I love that. And we're also doing what we need to do to make sure that we're recruiting for those right voices and working with partners that are giving enough time and enough budget to actually implement the feasibility of that. So I'll say that just in a nutshell. But yeah, it really is difficult and it's hard when you are the minority. So on the other aspect of things, if you're not in a group that's, you know, as diverse as something like that, ways that you can make sure that you do this. I was a mentorship program creator when I was in an employee resource group back at Macy's. And the organization was meant to help Black employees matriculate way higher than where we were falling off and moving and leaving the company. And how we really implemented strategies to do that was finding mentors that were also minorities to have one-to-one relationships with employees, but then also having those employees find a really close ally who can promote and just advocate for the things that they talk about at work. So they have that person saying, hey, Candace, what do you think? We want to make sure that we bring up something that you talk to me about one-on-one. Let's bring it up in the meeting. And then those types of conversations become easier to have. And that could happen with minorities and or not in big groups at work.
So I love that point because I love that idea that if you're part of a community, in your case at your workplace, you have that sort of accountability. There's that sense of accountability through the group that you're part of. People are asking questions and that sort of thing. And I love that idea. And that's one of the ways I was going to answer this question is, you know, if you're part of a research community and thinking about this in terms of research, then you can be held to task for your biases or whatever you bring to the study, whatever particular lenses you're bringing to the study, and some you may not even be aware of because your community may help you see them. If you're sharing your work ahead of time, we write proposals. If you're writing your proposal, things like that, you're sharing it with your colleagues and your community, people will raise those kinds of questions. So that's one way in which you can be held accountable and to task for things, you know, the blind areas that you might not see. But I'll tell you one other way that I think is really helpful. And again, this is based on me doing research by, you know, spending extensive time within the communities where I do the research. people will hold you accountable themselves. The research community will hold you accountable, and they will ask you questions, and they will tell you right up front something that you're not seeing or some bias that you bring. I have been held to task by the communities that I study. And this is, I think, a really good time to mention also that even if we identify as African American and we are going to study an African American community, that does not mean that there aren't certain sorts of things that we bring into this experience that we need to take account and take stock of. And again, I can, I could regale you with many stories about people who have held me to task for whatever I bring, whether it's, my American identity, whether it's my gender identity, whether, and almost always it is my academic university identity. These are the kinds of things that people have brought up for me all the time. And then there are even communities that I have studied that I think of as having a family connection to or some sort of family tie. And people will still remind me that, well, you may have that sort of tie, but you still bring this, that, and the other that sets you apart from us. And so you don't know everything. So those are the kinds of things that I think is important to remember, is that there are multiple ways in which you can be held accountable by your colleagues, your colleague community, as well as the African American communities, the Black communities that you are engaging with when you're doing research.
Absolutely, because we'll hold each other to task on our methods, right? And so, interrogating our practices. Carrie, anything on this one in terms of, how do we interrogate our own practices as researchers and our own biases that we bring to our studies and our work?
Yeah, I mean, I found that really powerful. I think that you confront your own biases one little itty bit at a time, and so I rely a lot on that collaborative process that we talked about. You don't, when you're thinking about research, I guess you're constantly trying to work against your individual perspective, and that's why you need that group input. And I especially use sometimes when you're at a point, if you're getting too invested in what you've put on the table, if I hear from two people something that they didn't like, they didn't think was quite right, then I know for sure that I am wrong and I need to change, right? So there's something special about that group process that really helps us. And I think what I took away the most today that I want to just put back in my mind is the idea that people read what you say about them. So that, think about the audience of the research, no matter what kind of research we're doing, and saying at the end of the day, can we all be proud of how we presented that in a way that I think, is respectful and accurate.
Mhm. And so I know I'm just looking at the time, Candace. This one, I feel is square in your spot in terms of what should brands be doing to be more sensitive in marketing so they don't end up scrambling to apologize to some racial or cultural group that they have offended. What does that look like? What is that process? What should they be doing differently to avoid those situations?
Yeah, I think this is a really loaded topic that can come at you from multiple ends, depending on where you're coming into the conversation and what conversations are being had. When specifically thinking about Black Lives Matter, which I'm assuming most brands are stepping up to discuss, I think that when it comes to marketing and sensitivity, the first thing is to know that if you're not ready to say something, wait and don't say anything at all, because you might get some, backlash for something of that nature, but you might have the time to really sit through and have a thoughtfully craft response. I think that that's one thing. Another thing is consistently putting your executive team, especially the ones in leadership positions for uh, many teams that are either revenue driven or marketing focused, to really make sure that they are having unconscious bias training and other things that promote DEI practices just at large. I think that that's really the biggest thing. At work, if we know that we're always thinking about it, we can be sensitive towards it and be a fly on the wall longer to notice what things are being said, and maybe not to put out something that seems like what everyone else is talking about, but also to really make sure that you're adding substance and even statistics when it comes to researchers that really inform your decision and show how you can take a stand. So I think that those are a couple of things, but it is really hard. And I think that the point of apologizing, which is the second half of the question, when a group might be offended, is almost inevitable. It happens. It even happened to a group that I can't even think of the brand, so I'll hold it. But I think it was Rihanna and Fenty. And I don't remember to what scale, but I do remember when Rihanna had, I think it was a promo video or a song that was at a fashion show for her Fashion Week brand launch. There was something related to that song being so sacred to the Islam community, and she and no one else on the team being informed enough to know that. And she could do nothing other than know that that would put back onus on her to say something. And a lot of times you just have to be very transparent about your ignorance and where you want to do better, and then follow up. A lot of the brands that I've worked with this year have put out statements last year around February, March of this time when things were happening after George Floyd and everything, but specifically that. They had made mention of things post Blackout Tuesday. But what I loved about one of the brands I worked with in beauty, Tula, if you've heard of them, they're LinkedIn's number 30 company on the top 50 startups list in 2020. And most are tech companies that are focused on healthcare and things related to the workforce to help people. And to think that this one beauty brand really stuck out to such a big company like LinkedIn for that list, it shows that they wanted to be proactive, be involved, and then be communicative about how they wanted to reintegrate. And they even published work that said, we did these things on social media. It was a 10 carousel swipe post. And one of my research study campaigns from beginning to end was highlighted to say, we hired CHH Consulting to do this. We put her and team and other members on the brand strategy side to inform on how to execute this. And now we're coming back to you with these results. And I think that that's really the beginning of the relationship, and then obviously keeping that going.
Awesome. Dr. Slocum, in terms of a final question for you is, how do we help Black Americans see themselves in research? I believe it's one of those things that we talked about earlier on the mistrust and the sensitivity, but I think that there's an other component to that where do Black Americans see themselves in research, and what can we do as researchers to help them see themselves in our work?
Do you mean, and let me just ask a clarification, do you mean in terms of just, like representation, or actually access to the results of research more, that they have more access to it?
I think it's a little bit of both. There's so many times just this is me search now in terms of just anecdotal where somebody said, Black Americans or African Americans think that. And I was like, well, I don't think that. They didn't talk to me. Who did they talk to? Right. And so it's a representation, but it's also how do I see myself in research? Do I feel that this is reflective and representative of me and my thoughts and my opinions?
Okay. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I think this is back to things that we've talked about before, which is if you are asking certain kinds of questions that represent African American communities, full spectrum, then you're going to have people be able to see themselves in what those research results are talking about. If we're missing certain kinds of things that are going on in Black communities with our questions and even our categories, then people are not going to be reflected in that research. And how you make sure you get the right questions and you get the right categorization is also through inclusion of people in that research process at the very beginning in the design stages I mentioned before. I think also recognition about Black communities as not monolithic, as I mentioned before. We have these sorts of ideas I mentioned before about Black communities as particular kinds of family structures, as Black communities and criminality and violence and poverty. These are the kinds of tropes we have around Black communities that continue to get represented over and over in our research. What if we think outside of those categories and think about, actually we've already heard here today about Black communities, Black Americans being very savvy regarding technology and media and these sorts of things. What if we see that really represented in the kinds of research that we're doing so that people can actually see themselves? So that's what I think it is about. I think it's about the kinds of questions and categories that we bring to the research when we actually design it, and who is at the table to help us figure out what are the right questions and the right categories.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Funk, my question, my last question to you is really about this capacity for data. How do we increase um, data usage by members of the Black community? So when we talk about, uh, building the full spectrum of use of our from the beginning in terms of when we're designing our studies, but also on the back end. And I think that that's kind of one area that sometimes don't always get talked about as researchers, which is the use of our data. What does building capacity look like in the Black community for using data in decision making? And what are some things that we as researchers can do to help either increase accessibility or help build capacity within the Black community for using data?
I think that's a great point. I think, just for example, Pew Research Center puts out almost all of their data sets for secondary data analysis, but they are in a insiders only format, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're either SPSS or Stata. You have to kind of know what you're doing. You've got to study the code books. There could be a lot of other things that we do to make that data more accessible. From old days experience working at a university, I saw a hunger for more data that was relevant. People were looking for it, right? So how can we get it out there and show them how to use it? We can make them experts. Maybe that's not realistic for everyone. We have done some other things with making basically interactive data tools on the website. We don't do it all the time, but we do it some of the time. And that is a lot more accessible as a format where, so that if you just want to know, then you can find it. So I think that might be a path to go down.
Absolutely. Well, ladies, thank you so much for your time in this wonderful discussion. I'd like to thank our participants for joining and for your wonderful questions. Just rounding us out, where can we find more about your work? And if you could just quickly just kind of let us know, for those of us that are interested in learning more about the work that you're doing and how we get connected to you.
So I can go. Oh, Dr. Slocum, sorry. So this has been a pleasure. I've enjoyed it so much, just speaking with you three ladies. It's been awesome. And I know it has been for everybody else on the panel, just watching and listening in. So I'll say that for sure. So thank you very much. But you can find me on LinkedIn, Candace Hokett, and I'm pretty approachable via direct message and available for many multicultural research projects, quant and qual related, but very much here to promote and talk about my baby right now, which is the Multicultural Insights Collective's Words Matter study, which is being run under our Voices of Equity vertical. And within equity, there's so much, but right now we're thinking about which ones of those words really hold the most power and what we can do to shift that power to purpose. So you can email us at info@voicesofequity.com, or you can visit us at voicesofequity.com.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Slocum?
Yes, you can find more about the Institute of African American Research and me at our website, which is iaar.unc.edu. And I also want to mention that we have something that's coming up in March called the Black Communities Conference. It's something that we've been having since 2018, and it is exactly related to what we're talking about here. It is a conference that helps academic researchers collaborate with Black communities and people who are doing work inside Black communities, artists, activists, nonprofit organizations, and so on. And so I'm actually going to put the website for the Black Communities Conference in the chat. And we welcome more participation if people would like to join us for that event. And I just want to finish by saying thank you so much for having me. This has been also a pleasure to speak with all of you and learn so much from you.
Thank you. Dr. Funk?
It's fantastic. I wish we could keep on talking. It's really been fascinating. You can find all of our work at pewresearch.org. You can email to reach any expert we have at info@pewresearch.org. On the website, there's a topics page for all our work related to African Americans that kind of has it all summarized there. So hopefully we will connect down the road.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. I'm Camille Lloyd. In terms of the work that I'm doing at the Gallup Center on Black Voices, you can go on gallup.com, or you can also listen to our podcast called Cultural Competence, wherever you get your podcasts. And thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.